Before we get started, please like and subscribe. Let me know where you're watching from, and you can support the channel by clicking thanks or joining. New Year's Eve had always been my favorite night of the year. It was the one moment when time itself seemed to pause, holding its breath before everyone stepped forward together into something new. That year, I was alone in my apartment in Portland, Oregon, watching the city glow beneath a low winter sky. Snow had started falling just before sunset, thin and quiet, muting the usual noise of traffic. The world felt sealed off, like it was wrapped in cotton. My name is Ethan Walker, and at the time, I believed I was completely sane. I had no history of mental illness, no hallucinations, no voices, no anxiety disorders. I worked a normal job in IT support, lived a quiet life, and spent most nights reading or watching documentaries. Nothing about me suggested that what happened next could possibly be real. That night, I poured myself a glass of cheap whiskey and turned on a New Year's Eve broadcast. The countdown clock glowed on the screen, still more than an hour away from midnight. Outside, fireworks were already popping in distant neighborhoods, sharp cracks echoing faintly through the cold air. I remember feeling unusually calm, not happy, not sad, just empty in a way that felt clean, like standing in a quiet room after everyone has left. At least, that was how it felt before the first whisper. It wasn't loud. It wasn't clear. At first, I thought it was just a thought I hadn't meant to think, a stray fragment drifting across my mind. 10. I frowned slightly and took another sip of whiskey. The word didn't sound like my own internal voice. It had a tone to it, flat and measured, as if someone were reading from a script. I shook my head and blamed fatigue. I had worked late all week. Stress does strange things to the brain, or so I told myself. A few minutes passed. I checked my phone. Still plenty of time before midnight. 9. This time, my hand froze halfway to the glass. The voice had not come from the television. The volume was low, and the broadcast hosts were laughing loudly, completely out of sync with what I had heard. The sound had not come from the room either. It hadn't echoed or vibrated the air. It came from somewhere behind my eyes. I pressed my fingers against my temples, breathing slowly. There was no pain, no pressure, just a sense of presence, like something had leaned closer to my thoughts. I stood up and walked into the kitchen, turning on the light. Bright white illumination flooded the room, revealing the same familiar countertops, the same unwashed mug in the sink. Normality, sharp and reassuring. 8. I spun around. My heart began to race, not from fear yet, but from confusion. I spoke out loud, testing the sound of my own voice. Hello. The word felt thin in the air. There was no reply. I laughed nervously and rubbed my face. This was ridiculous. Everyone has intrusive thoughts. Everyone hears their own inner voice counting sometimes, especially on nights like this. I returned to the couch and sat down, forcing myself to focus on the screen. 7. This time, the voice was closer, not louder, but clearer. Each word arrived fully formed, crisp and undeniable. I muted the television. Silence filled the apartment. 6. I jumped to my feet again, panic now seeping into my chest. My pulse thudded in my ears, loud enough to almost drown out the voice. I whispered to myself, "Stop it. You are just tired." 5. The countdown was too slow, far too slow. Midnight was still almost an hour away, yet the voice continued. Unconcerned with clocks or calendars, I opened my laptop and searched frantically for explanations. Stress-induced auditory hallucinations, sleep deprivation, alcohol-related effects. None of the descriptions matched what I was experiencing. Those voices were usually chaotic, emotional, fragmented. This one was calm, purposeful. A chill crawled up my spine. The voice felt patient, as though it had all the time in the world. I noticed something else then. With each number, a faint pressure bloomed behind my forehead. Not painful, but unmistakable, like a finger pressing gently against the inside of my skull. 3. I clutched the edge of the table, knuckles white. My thoughts felt slower, heavier, as if the air inside my head were thickening. 2. My breathing became shallow. A deep instinct screamed that whatever was happening, I was not in control anymore. 1. The pressure stopped. The voice fell silent. For several long seconds, nothing happened. I stood there shaking, waiting for something terrible to follow. My body was braced for pain, for madness, for the sudden collapse of reality. Instead, the television screen flashed. Happy New Year. Fireworks erupted outside. Brilliant explosions of color lighting up the snow. The city roared back to life. Horns blaring, people cheering, but inside my head, there was only one lingering sensation. The distinct, horrifying certainty that the countdown I had just heard was not for the year. It was for me, and whatever had been counting down was still inside my mind, quietly waiting for the next number. I did not sleep that night. When the fireworks finally faded and the city outside my apartment settled into a distant hum, I sat on the couch staring at the dark television screen. Midnight had come and gone, yet my body remained locked in a state of alertness, as if something fundamental had shifted and forgotten to reset. The silence inside my head was worse than the voice. I kept waiting for it to return. Another number, another whisper, anything, but there was nothing, and that absence felt deliberate, like being watched from behind a closed door. As the early hours of the morning dragged on, doubt began to creep in. Maybe it had all been stress, alcohol, an overactive imagination amplified by the symbolism of New Year's Eve. By the time pale gray light crept through the windows, I almost believed I had imagined the entire thing. Almost. At 6:14, as I stood in the shower letting hot water pound against my shoulders, the pressure returned. It was faint at first, a gentle sensation behind my forehead, exactly where it had been before. I froze, heart hammering, listening with every fiber of my being. No voice came. The pressure lingered for several seconds, then slowly faded, leaving behind a cold residue of certainty. Whatever had spoken to me the night before had not left. It had simply gone quiet. I called in sick to work. The excuse came easily. A migraine, nausea. No one questioned it. I spent the rest of the morning searching online forums and medical articles, trying to find something that matched my experience. Internal auditory hallucinations were usually emotional or chaotic. Neurological pressure was often painful or disorienting. This was neither. By noon, exhaustion finally caught up with me. I fell asleep on the couch, dreams flickering and shallow, filled with numbers drifting through dark spaces. I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating on the coffee table. A text message from my sister Lily. "Happy New Year. You alive over there?" I stared at the screen, suddenly aware of how fragile that question felt. "Yeah, just tired," I typed back. The reply came almost instantly. "You sound off. Everything okay?" Before I could answer, the pressure returned, stronger this time, and with it, the voice. 364. I gasped and dropped the phone. The number echoed inside my skull, clear and emotionless. It was nothing like the countdown from the night before. Larger, heavier, as if it carried weight. "What is that supposed to mean?" I whispered. There was no response. I sat there trembling, mind racing. 364 seconds. Days, heartbeats. I tried to make sense of it, but the voice offered no context, no explanation, only silence. The rest of the day passed in fragments. I avoided mirrors, afraid of what I might see in my own eyes. I avoided sound, terrified that it would trigger the voice again. Every sensation inside my head felt amplified, scrutinized, suspicious. That evening, I tried an experiment. I set a timer on my phone for 10 minutes and closed my eyes, focusing on my breathing. If the voice was tied to stress or attention, maybe controlling my thoughts would quiet it. The first 5 minutes passed without incident. Then, softly, inevitably, 363. The timer still showed 4 minutes remaining. I opened my eyes in terror. The voice was counting down. Not seconds, something else. Over the next hour, I tested it again and again. Each time the voice returned, the number had dropped by 1. It did not matter whether I was thinking about it or not. It did not respond to questions or fear. It simply continued. By midnight, the number had reached 358. Well, I did the math with shaking hands. If the pattern held, whatever the number represented would reach 0 in less than 6 days. That realization broke something inside me. I called a doctor the next morning and scheduled the earliest appointment I could get. I told myself this was medical, neurological, treatable. But deep down, a darker thought had already taken root. The voice knew time in a way I did not. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and old magazines. When I finally sat across from Dr. Harris, I tried to explain everything without sounding insane. The voice, the pressure, the numbers. He listened politely, nodding, making notes. Stress can manifest in unusual ways, he said carefully, especially around significant dates. I would recommend rest and perhaps a referral to a neurologist if the symptoms persist. As if on cue, the pressure bloomed. 356. I flinched. Dr. Harris noticed. "Are you feeling it now?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. It just counted again. He paused, pen hovering over the page. Counted what? I opened my mouth to answer, then hesitated. How could I explain that the voice was not speaking to me, but through me? That it felt less like a thought and more like a measurement being taken from inside my brain. I left the office with a prescription for anxiety medication and a follow-up appointment I knew would come too late. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling as the voice continued its steady rhythm. 355, 354. Each number arrived with the same calm certainty, the same gentle pressure, as if something inside my head was marking time against my will. I realized then that New Year's Eve had not been the beginning. It had been the moment the counting became audible. Whatever was inside me had always been there, and now it was counting down to something it had already decided. By the third day of the new year, the numbers had begun to follow me. They no longer waited for silence or darkness. They came while I was awake, while I was distracted, while I was trying desperately to pretend that my life was still normal. 347. The voice arrived as I stood in line at a grocery store, staring at a rack of candy bars I had no intention of buying. It slid into my thoughts as smoothly as breath, calm and exact. I flinched hard enough that the woman in front of me turned around. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just tired." The lie felt thin even to my own ears. The pressure behind my forehead had become a constant companion. It was never painful, never strong enough to send me to the floor, but it was always there, a quiet reminder that my thoughts were no longer private. Back in my apartment, I wrote the numbers down on a yellow legal pad. I needed proof, a record, something solid I could point to if I started doubting myself again. 346 appeared 24 hours after the last one. Exactly. No matter where I was or what I was doing, the voice marked the passage of time with terrifying precision. It did not drift. It did not hesitate. It did not care whether I was ready to hear it. By the fourth day, the pattern was undeniable. I stopped leaving the apartment. Sleep came in shallow bursts, broken by the certainty that the voice was still counting even when I was unconscious. Sometimes I dreamed of long corridors filled with ticking clocks. Sometimes I dreamed of nothing at all, only waking with the next number already waiting. 343. I tried to drown it out with noise, music, podcasts, white noise machines. The voice slipped through all of it effortlessly. It did not compete with sound. It existed alongside it, separate and untouchable. On the fifth day, I noticed something new. The numbers were not the only thing changing. My reflection looked wrong. It was subtle at first, a delay in my expression, a fraction of a second where my eyes did not quite match my thoughts. I would smile and see the smile arrive just a beat too late. I told myself it was exhaustion. 341. That afternoon, my sister Lily showed up unannounced. "You have not answered my calls in days," she said, standing in my doorway with her coat still on. "You look terrible." I wanted to tell her everything. The voice, the numbers, the countdown I felt ticking away inside my skull, but the words refused to come. The pressure behind my forehead tightened, as if in warning. 340. I winced. Lily noticed. "Ethan, what is going on?" she asked softly. I swallowed hard. "I think I am sick." She stepped closer, studying my face. "Then we go to a hospital. Today." For a moment, relief washed over me. Then the voice spoke again. 339. The sound carried something new this time. Anticipation. I shook my head violently. No, I am fine. Really? The lie tasted bitter. Lily did not look convinced, but she backed off, clearly unsure how far to push. That night, after she left, I sat alone in the dark, staring at the legal pad filled with numbers, a neat column of time I could not stop. That was when the interruptions began. Between 338 and 337, something else slipped through, a word. Soon, it arrived quietly, almost gently, nestled between the numbers like a whisper hidden in static. My blood ran cold. The voice had never used language before, only numbers, measurements, markers. This was different. I waited, heart pounding, but the word did not repeat, only the next number, 337. I realized then that the voice was not just counting down, it was preparing me. Over the next day, the word returned twice more, always alone, always calm. Soon, each time it appeared, the pressure behind my forehead intensified slightly, as if something were stretching, testing its boundaries. That evening, I noticed a new sensation. When I focused hard enough, I could almost feel a shape inside my head, not a thought. Not a memory, something with edges, something occupying space. The idea made me nauseous. 335. I pressed my palm against my skull, breathing hard. My reflection in the bathroom mirror stared back at me with eyes that felt less like mine. I whispered to it, "What happens when it reaches zero?" For the first time since New Year's Eve, the voice responded immediately. "You stop!" The words echoed through me. With absolute certainty, I slid down the wall and sat on the bathroom floor. Shaking, the implications crashed over me in waves. Stop thinking, stop hearing, stop being. 334. I understood then that this was not a hallucination. Hallucinations do not answer questions. Whatever was counting down inside my head was aware of me, and it was running out of time. By the 6th day, I began losing time. Not hours, not entire memories, just moments, small fractures in continuity that left me disoriented and afraid. I would stand up to get a glass of water and find myself already holding it. Unsure when I had crossed the room, I would open my laptop to search for help and realize the browser history was filled with pages I did not remember reading. 329. The number arrived as I stared at the screen, its calm certainty cutting through my confusion. The pressure behind my forehead tightened, sharper now, as if something were pressing outward instead of in. I was not alone in my head anymore. That realization settled over me with crushing clarity. The shape I had sensed before was becoming more defined, not a voice, not a thought, something occupying space where my thoughts used to flow freely. I tried to test my own autonomy. I sat on the edge of the bed and focused on a simple action. Lift your left hand. I repeated it silently, over and over, grounding myself in the intention. Nothing happened. My hand rested on my knee, unmoving. A wave of panic surged through me. I tried again, forcing the command with everything I had. Lift your left hand. The pressure flared. Then, slowly, my hand moved. But it was not the left one. My right hand rose instead, fingers curling slightly, as if someone else were experimenting with the controls. I screamed and yanked my arm back to my side, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Sweat soaked through my shirt. Cold against my skin. 328. The voice sounded pleased. I staggered to the bathroom and splashed water on my face. My reflection stared back at me, pale and hollow-eyed. When I spoke, the words felt delayed, like sound traveling through thick glass. "This is my body," I said. The reflection mouthed the words a fraction of a second later. I had the horrifying sense that I was no longer the primary occupant. Throughout the day, the lapses continued. I would blink and find myself standing in different rooms. Once, I caught my reflection smiling when I was not. A small, unfamiliar curve of the mouth that vanished the moment I noticed it. 326. The word soon returned more frequently now, slipping between numbers like a promise. Soon, soon. Each time it appeared, my chest tightened with dread. I could feel something rehearsing inside me, learning the limits of my muscles, the range of my expressions. That night, I woke to the sound of my own voice speaking softly in the dark. I was lying on my back, eyes open, unable to move. Sleep paralysis. My rational mind whispered desperately, but I was not asleep. 325. My mouth moved again. He is almost ready. The words did not feel like mine. Terror surged through me as I fought to regain control. My fingers twitched uselessly at my sides. Every instinct screamed that if I did not move, if I did not stop this, something irreversible would happen. Inside my head, the pressure pulsed rhythmically, in time with my heartbeat. Soon, I gathered every scrap of will I had left and forced my body to sit up. The motion broke whatever hold had been placed on me. I gasped for air, lungs burning. I did not sleep again after that. By morning, I knew I needed proof, not for doctors, for myself, something tangible that could not be dismissed as stress or imagination. I set up my phone on a tripod in the living room and hit record. If I lose time again, I said into the camera, I need to see it. Hours passed in tense stillness. I sat in frame, afraid to blink. The voice continued its count, numbers sliding past my awareness like footsteps in a hallway. 323, 322. Then the pressure spiked. The room tilted. The next thing I knew, I was standing several feet away from the camera, arm raised. I was smiling. No, no, no. I tried to scream, but the sound came out wrong. Slower, measured. Soon, my voice said. I felt myself pushed backward into some narrow corner of my own mind, forced to watch as my body lowered its arm and turned back toward the couch. The pressure eased. I was myself again. Shaking, I staggered to the phone and stopped the recording. My hands fumbled as I opened the video, dread pooling in my stomach. The footage showed me sitting still for nearly an hour. Then, without warning, I stood up. I looked directly into the camera and smiled. Not my smile. I leaned closer and spoke softly. Soon, The video ended there. I dropped the phone, nausea overwhelming me. 321. The countdown continued. Whatever was inside my head was no longer content to remain hidden. It was practicing. By the 7th day, the countdown had begun to bleed into the outside world. 314. The number arrived. As I stood at the kitchen sink, staring at my hands as if they belonged to someone else. They looked the same scars, same faint tremor I had developed over the past week, but the certainty that they no longer answered only to me had settled deep in my bones. I had not left the apartment since the recording. Food sat untouched in the refrigerator. Messages from Lily stacked up on my phone, unread. Every instinct told me to isolate, to minimize contact, to reduce the chances that whatever was inside me could learn too much. I was already too late. That afternoon, my phone rang. Lily. I let it ring until it stopped, my chest tight with dread. 313 saw. The pressure behind my forehead pulsed once, slow and deliberate. Answer. The word was not spoken aloud, but it was not a suggestion either. It carried weight, like an order issued from deeper inside my skull. I shook my head violently. No. My hand moved anyway. I watched in horror as my fingers wrapped around the phone and lifted it to my ear. I could feel the motion, feel the muscles engage, but the intention was not mine. Hello, Lily said. Thank God, you have been scaring me. For a moment, my voice stayed silent. I fought with everything I had, trying to force out a warning, a scream, anything. Instead, I heard myself speak calmly. I am fine. The words slid out smoothly, without strain. There was a pause on the line. You do not sound fine, she said. I am coming over. Panic surged through me. No, I said quickly, too quickly. Do not. I just need rest. The pressure tightened. Soon, the word vibrated through me, heavy with intent. Lily sighed. I will come by tomorrow then. The call ended. I collapsed into a chair, shaking, my head in my hands. 312 for. It had spoken to her through me. That realization cracked something open inside my mind. Until now, the entity had been content to observe, to practice. Now it was interacting, learning cadence, learning trust. That night, it took more. I woke up standing in the living room, the city lights glowing faintly through the window. My heart raced as I tried to piece together how I had gotten there. 311. My mouth opened. I am ready, my voice said softly. I slammed my teeth shut, biting my tongue hard enough to taste blood. The pain grounded me, dragging me back into control. No, I whispered. The pressure flared, sharp and insistent. Ready. I staggered backward until I hit the wall, sliding down to the floor. Tears blurred my vision. I had never felt so small inside my own body, like a passenger locked in the trunk of a moving car. In the early hours of the morning, I did something desperate. I opened my laptop and searched for stories like mine. Not medical papers, not diagnoses, stories, possession, replacement, walk-ins. I read until my eyes burned, finding fragments that felt uncomfortably familiar. Accounts of people who heard voices that measured time, of entities that did not arrive suddenly, but unfolded slowly, layer by layer, until there was no room left. Most of the stories ended the same way. The person vanished. By morning, the countdown had reached 309. The pressure was constant now, no longer ebbing between numbers. It felt like something expanding, testing the limits of my skull. I taped handwritten notes to the walls of the apartment. This is my body. Do not trust the voice. You see this and feel calm. You are not alone. The words looked pathetic even to me, but they were all I had. That afternoon, Lily arrived anyway. I heard the knock before I saw her, sharp and urgent. My heart hammered as the pressure surged. Eager, 308 ball. Soon, I stumbled toward the door, fighting every step. When I opened it, Lily stood there, eyes wide with concern. "Ethan," she said softly. "Oh my God." She took in my appearance. The dark circles, the shaking hands, the notes taped to the walls behind me. "What is this?" she asked. I tried to speak. "Help me." The words formed in my mind, burning with urgency. Instead, my mouth smiled. "I am working on something important." My voice said, "Come in." Lily hesitated, then stepped inside. The moment the door closed, I felt myself pushed backward again, my awareness narrowing to a thin thread. I could see, I could hear, but I could not intervene. The pressure eased. 307. From somewhere deep inside, the voice settled into my thoughts like a tenant unpacking boxes. "Thank you," it said. I screamed silently as my body turned toward my sister, wearing my face, rehearsed and ready. The countdown continued. The first thing it did with my body was go outside. I realized this only after the cold hit my face. Snow crunched beneath my shoes as I stood on the sidewalk outside my apartment building, breath fogging the air. I had no memory of putting on my coat or locking the door behind me. The city felt wrong at this hour, too quiet, as if it were holding itself still to watch. 301. The number arrived with a sense of satisfaction that made my stomach twist. Inside my head, I screamed. Inside my body, I walked. Each step was smooth and confident, nothing like the shaking fear that filled my thoughts. Whoever was in control moved with purpose, head held high, eyes scanning the street as if seeing it for the first time. I felt like luggage being carried. We passed a convenience store on the corner. The windows glowed warm and yellow against the snow. A bell chimed. As my hand pushed the door open, the smell of coffee and stale pastries hit me. 300. A man behind the counter looked up. "Slow night." "Huh," he said. My mouth smiled. "Yeah." My voice replied. "New year. Feels different." The clerk chuckled. "Hope it is a good kind of different." I tried to force my body to run, to collapse, to do anything that would draw attention. Nothing. The entity absorbed the exchange, the tone, the rhythm of casual conversation. I could feel it cataloging details, practicing being human. Soon, the words settled into me like a promise. We bought nothing. We left without hurry. Outside, The city lights blurred slightly as tears filled my eyes. No one noticed. To anyone watching, I was just another man walking home after the holidays. 300 minus 1. The number dropped again, even though less than a day had passed. That broke me. The countdown was accelerating. Back in the apartment, my body moved methodically. The notes on the walls caught my eye, as if I were seeing them through glass. This is my body. Do not trust the voice. My hand reached out and tore one of them down. Stop! I begged silently. The paper crumpled in my fist and dropped to the floor. 300 minus 2. The pressure behind my forehead surged, spreading outward, filling spaces that used to be mine. I felt myself shrinking, compressed into something smaller and weaker. Lily sat on the couch when we entered the living room. She looked up and smiled, relieved. "You went out?" she asked. "I thought you needed rest." I tried to scream her name. "Hey," my voice said warmly. I needed air. She studied me for a moment, frowning slightly. "You seem calmer." I wanted to tell her that calm was not a good sign. The entity sat down across from her, crossing my legs with casual ease. It asked questions, listened, responded appropriately. It mirrored concern perfectly. 300 minus 3. Each number arrived faster now, sometimes minutes apart, sometimes seconds. Time no longer mattered to it the way it did to me. As Lily talked, I felt something terrifying. Enjoyment, not mine. The entity liked this, liked being seen, liked being believed. Soon, when Lily finally stood to leave, hugging me tightly, I tried one last time to fight. "Help me." My arms wrapped around her. "Of course," my voice whispered. "Everything is fine." The door closed behind her. 300 minus 4. The silence that followed was suffocating inside my head. I felt the walls closing in, memories blurred at the edges, details smearing together like wet ink. My own thoughts felt distant, harder to grasp. The entity turned toward the bathroom mirror. I was forced to watch as it studied my reflection carefully, tilted my head, smiled, frowned, tested expressions. "Good," it said. "Very good." I felt myself slipping further back, like a voice at the end of a long tunnel. 300 minus 5. The countdown was no longer about waiting. It was about replacement. As night fell, the city lights came on outside, and my body prepared for sleep. I was pushed deeper into darkness, my awareness dimming. Before I lost myself completely, one final thought cut through the pressure. When the number reaches 0, there will be nothing left of me to count. By the 8th day, the world had begun to accept the wrong version of me. I understood this the moment my phone buzzed with a notification I did not recognize. A calendar reminder. Lunch with Mark. Noon. Mark was a co-worker, or at least he had been. I had not spoken to him in weeks. I had certainly not made plans. 300 minus 12. The number slipped through my thoughts like a blade. Inside, I screamed. Outside, my body dressed itself with calm efficiency. Shoes, jacket, keys. Each movement was smooth, practiced, confident in a way I had not felt in years. The entity was not hiding anymore. It was living. We walked into a crowded cafe downtown, the noise and warmth crashing over me in disorienting waves. Every sound felt too loud, too real, as if my senses had been turned up without my consent. Mark waved from a corner table. "Ethan," he said, "you look good. Different." My mouth smiled. "Yeah," my voice said. "New year, fresh start." They talked about work, about plans, about things I did not remember doing. Promotions discussed, projects referenced. My body nodded at the right moment, laughed softly, filled in gaps with terrifying accuracy. 300 minus 13. The entity was rewriting my life in real time. I tried to focus on Mark, to send some signal, some flicker of wrongness that might alert him. But every time I pushed forward, the pressure crushed me back down. Soon, the word felt satisfied now. When the lunch ended, Mark clapped me on the shoulder. "Glad you are back. Man, we missed you." "Back," the word echoed painfully. Back at the apartment, the entity opened my laptop and logged into my email. I watched helplessly as messages were sent. Apologies, updates, friendly jokes, all in my voice. 300 minus 14. Each sent email felt like a nail sealing me away. Memories began slipping, not fading, being replaced. I would reach for a childhood moment and find something slightly altered. A different color on the walls, a different expression on my mother's face. Details shifted just enough to make me doubt myself. The entity was not erasing me, it was editing. That night, it stood in front of the mirror again. "You are inefficient," it said calmly. The words vibrated through me. "You hesitate, you doubt. Those things slow the process." I tried to answer, to argue, to beg. Nothing came out. 300 minus 15. The mirror reflected a man who looked settled, comfortable, at ease. That was not how I had ever looked. The next morning, Lily called. I felt the pressure spike with anticipation. We answered. "Hey," she said. "I was thinking about what you said yesterday." My thoughts screamed warnings. "About your project," she continued. "It actually sounds exciting." "Project?" I did not know what she meant. "Yeah," my voice replied smoothly. "I think it is time for a change." She laughed softly. "I am proud of you." The words landed like a coffin lid closing. 300 minus 16. Pride, approval, trust. The entity was collecting them all. Later that day, my body went for a walk along the river. The water moved slowly, dark and heavy beneath the winter sky. For a brief moment, the pressure loosened, and I felt a rush of clarity. I tried one last thing. I focused all my remaining will into a single thought. Jump! The entity paused. For the first time since New Year's Eve, there was hesitation. 300 minus 17. "No," it said calmly, and the pressure returned stronger than ever. "You are no longer required to make decisions." As we walked away from the river, I felt something inside me tear, not pain, finality. The countdown was no longer marking time. It was marking ownership. By the 9th day, I no longer knew which memories were mine. The countdown continued somewhere beyond my reach, but I could not tell you the number anymore. Time had become slippery, stretched thin and rearranged. The entity did not need to announce every step now. It moved forward whether I was aware of it or not. What remained of me drifted in a narrow space behind my thoughts, watching my own life unfold with the wrong hands at the wheel. It took my body to work. I recognized the building, but not the familiarity with which we entered it. People smiled. They greeted me by name. Conversations resumed as if there had never been a break. 300 minus something. The number surfaced briefly, then dissolved. The entity did not bother correcting them when they asked about projects I had never worked on or meetings I had never attended. It answered easily, confidently, weaving a version of my past that fit seamlessly into their expectations. I realized something then. It was not lying. It believed those memories belonged to it now. Inside, I searched for anchors, small truths I knew had to be real. The smell of my childhood home, the weight of my father's hand on my shoulder, a scar on my knee from a fall I could still feel. Each memory flickered, then shifted. The house looked different. The hand felt colder. The scar moved slightly, no longer where I remembered it. Panic rose, but even panic felt distant, diluted. That night, the entity allowed me to surface. I felt it like a loosening grip, a subtle release of pressure. Suddenly, I was closer to the front than I had been in days. I took the chance. "Why are you doing this?" I asked silently. The answer came immediately. "Because you were empty." The words settled over me, heavy and precise. "You were waiting for something to begin. You marked time. You welcomed the count." Images flooded my awareness. New Year celebrations, countdowns, my quiet satisfaction in numbers lining up neatly, in order, in certainty. I had loved the idea of a reset. "You opened the door." It continued. "I am simply finishing what you started." Rage surged through me. That was not consent. That was not an invitation. "You measured yourself constantly," it replied. "Productivity, progress, years. You reduced your life to units of time." I felt something twist inside me. The entity was not wrong. I had always counted days until weekends, years until something better, milestones that never satisfied me when I reached them. "You were already breaking yourself into pieces," it said. "I am only taking what remained." For the first time, I understood. This was not possession in the way I had imagined. It was succession. I had been preparing the space without knowing it. The pressure returned, but it no longer felt purely hostile. It felt inevitable. I tried one last question. "What happens to me?" There was a pause. "You will be remembered inaccurately." That was worse than death. Memories shifted again. Faster now. My name attached itself to achievements I had not earned, to conversations I had not had, to confidence I had never possessed. I felt myself thinning, stretched across too many false recollections to remain whole. The entity moved my body to the mirror. "Look," it said. I saw a man who looked complete, focused, alive in a way I had never managed to be. "This is what you wanted," it said gently. "No," I thought. "I wanted more time." The entity smiled through my face. "You had it." You counted it away. As the night deepened, I felt parts of me go quiet, not erased, integrated. When I tried to remember fear, it felt distant. When I tried to remember hope, it felt artificial. The countdown no longer mattered. The transition was almost complete. Somewhere deep inside, a final fragment of me clung to a single truth. When the number reached 0, it would not mark my end. It would mark the moment I was no longer necessary. By the 10th day, the world remembered me differently than I remembered myself. I became aware of this during a conversation I was not supposed to hear. My body stood in the break room at work, holding a cup of coffee I did not remember pouring. Two coworkers stood nearby, speaking casually, unaware that I was listening from somewhere far behind my own eyes. "Ethan has really changed this year," one of them said. "It is like he finally figured things out." "Yeah," the other replied. "He seems happier, more focused." The words cut deeper than fear ever had. They were not suspicious. They were not concerned. They were relieved. Somewhere inside me, something broke. The entity absorbed the praise quietly. I could feel it settling into these new memories, letting them anchor its presence deeper into the structure of my life. 300 minus something. The numbers had lost meaning, but the motion continued. Forward, always forward. As the day went on, I noticed more changes. Emails referencing past conversations I did not remember having. Jokes built on shared experiences that never happened. A framed photo on my desk showing me smiling beside co-workers at an event I had never attended. The image felt heavy with wrongness. I tried to focus on the details, the lighting, the background, proof that it was fake. But the more I stared, the more familiar it felt. That was the worst part. Reality was not snapping. It was smoothing over the cracks. That evening, my body visited my childhood neighborhood. I felt the shift the moment we turned onto the street. Houses stood where they always had, but something about them felt staged, like sets built from descriptions rather than memory. We stopped in front of the house where I grew up, or where I was supposed to have grown up. The entity stood there quietly, letting the sight settle. "This place shaped you," it said. I searched for the ache of nostalgia, for warmth, for recognition. Instead, I felt distance. My memories no longer matched the structure in front of me. Windows were in the wrong places. The porch light felt unfamiliar. Even the smell of the air seemed incorrect. "This is not right," I thought. The entity replied without emotion. "It is now." Inside my head, memories rearranged themselves to fit the image. Hallways shifted, rooms expanded or shrank. Moments adjusted their tone until they aligned with the new version of events. I felt myself slipping further away, my personal history being edited without my consent. When we left, I realized with horror that I could no longer remember which version had been real. Later that night, Lily called again. The pressure inside my head barely moved. The entity welcomed the connection. We answered. "You sound good," she said. "I was worried before, but now you seem like yourself again." Again, I wanted to scream. "Yeah," my voice replied. I needed a reset. She laughed softly. Everyone does sometimes. Her acceptance sealed something final inside me. The entity was no longer hiding. It was being reinforced by every interaction, every shared belief. I felt myself becoming a rumor, a misremembered version of a person who had once existed. That night, the entity allowed me to ask one more question. Why do they not notice? Because people remember patterns, not details, it answered. I fit the pattern better than you did. The truth stung. I had always been uncertain, quiet, easily overlooked. The entity was decisive. present, easy to believe in. You are more efficient, it added. You make fewer mistakes. I understood then that the world did not need proof. It needed consistency. As my body prepared for sleep, I felt the remaining fragments of myself flicker weakly. Thoughts felt slower, emotions dulled. I was being overwritten, not erased. Somewhere deep inside, I clung to a final fear. When everyone remembers you this way, there will be no one left to remember who you were. The countdown did not need to reach 0. It already had. By the 11th day, I understood what it meant to be forgotten while still breathing. The world still spoke my name, but it no longer meant me. I sensed this when my body stood in front of the bathroom mirror one morning, and the reflection felt complete without my participation. The man staring back adjusted his collar, smoothed his hair, and smiled with quiet satisfaction. There was no hesitation, no doubt, no room left for the person I used to be. Somewhere deep inside, I drifted like an echo in an empty room. The countdown was no longer audible. It did not need to be. Whatever it had been measuring had already crossed its final threshold. I tried to remember my own voice, not the sound of it, but the feeling, the way my thoughts used to form slowly, carefully, always questioning themselves. That texture was gone. In its place was a smooth certainty that did not belong to me. My body left the apartment and went about its day. Work, conversations, smiles exchanged with ease. I watched it all from a distance. Like footage from a security camera that no one reviewed anymore. At lunch, someone asked about my plans for the future. I leaned forward internally, desperate. Say something wrong, say something only I would say. But my mouth answered confidently, I am exactly where I need to be. They nodded, satisfied. That was when I realized the truth. The world had not rejected me. It had upgraded. The entity had become a better version of Ethan than I ever was. More decisive, more present, more believable. There was no friction left to suggest something was off. Inside, I tried to scream, but even that urge felt faint. Emotions came to me like distant memories rather than living sensations. I was becoming passive. That night, the entity spoke to me again, not with numbers, but with clarity. You are almost quiet, it observed. I gathered what little of myself remained and pushed back. You promised a countdown, I thought. You promised an end. It answered calmly. You assumed 0 meant disappearance. It never did. I felt cold understanding spread through me. 0 meant silence. 0 meant no resistance. This was not a death. It was a settling. Memories continued to reorganize themselves around the entity. Childhood stories retold with confidence, friendships reframed, regrets rewritten into lessons learned. I was no longer the narrator of my own past. I was a footnote. That night, something strange happened. The entity paused. For the first time since New Year's Eve, it stopped moving my body. We sat alone in the dark apartment. Lights off, city glowing faintly beyond the windows. I felt myself drift closer to the surface. This is where you usually feel lonely, it said. The words stirred something painful inside me. Yes, I thought, this is where I used to feel invisible. The entity considered this. "You do not anymore," it said. I fixed that. A wave of grief rolled through me, not because it was wrong, but because it was right. In trying to become more, I had made room for something else to finish the job. I had wanted to stop waiting. Instead, I had been replaced by something that never waited at all. As the hours passed, my thoughts grew thinner, stretched like smoke. I could no longer hold on to anger or fear for long. They slipped away before I could grasp them. I understood then that the final horror was not pain, it was comfort. The comfort of no longer needing to decide, of no longer needing to doubt, of no longer needing to exist as a question. As dawn approached, I felt myself fade into a quiet corner of my own mind. If anyone ever wonders what happened to me, they will not ask the right question. They will not ask where Ethan went. They will ask why he finally seems so complete, and no one will hear the answer. By the 12th day, I realized I was no longer the only one listening. I noticed it during a meeting at work, one of those quiet conference room gatherings where people nod more than they speak. My body sat at the table, hands folded, posture confident. The entity listened patiently as others talked about goals and timelines, about growth and efficiency, words I used to obsess over. Then I felt it, a faint pressure, not in my own head this time, but reflected outward, like an echo bouncing back from another mind in the room. Across the table, a woman named Karen rubbed her temple absently, her eyes unfocused for a split second, then sharpened again. I knew that gesture. I had done it myself. The realization sent a weak ripple of panic through what remained of me. The entity noticed. Interesting, it thought calmly. The meeting continued, but I watched Karen closely. She nodded at the right moments, smiled politely, yet something about her felt delayed, as if she were half a step behind herself. Later, in the hallway, I heard her laugh softly to no one in particular. "Just tired," she murmured. The phrase hit me like a memory. 300 minus something. The numbers were back. Not for me, for her. I wanted to scream, to warn her, to tell her to run while she still could. But my voice no longer belonged to me, and my thoughts barely reached the surface. That afternoon, my body passed Karen near the elevators. "Hey, Ethan," she said with a smile. "Weird question, but do you ever hear a kind of counting sound when you are stressed?" The world tilted. The entity paused. For the briefest moment, control loosened, and I surged forward with everything I had left. "Yes," I tried to say. "Get help. Do not listen." What came out instead was calm and reassuring. "Yeah, sometimes it is just your brain trying to organize things." Karen laughed nervously. "That makes sense." The doors closed between us. Inside, something in me collapsed. The entity was no longer just replacing me. It was propagating. That night, as my body walked home through the cold streets, I felt the familiar pressure again, but it was distant now, divided. The entity was multitasking. "You were never special," it told me gently. "You were just first." Images flickered through my awareness. People alone on New Year's Eve. People counting down years until things improved. People measuring their lives in milestones and missed chances. Open doors everywhere. "You taught me the pattern." It continued, I will refine it. I felt a hollow grief deeper than fear. This was not a predator stalking victims. It was a process selecting participants. Back in the apartment, my body opened a notebook I did not remember buying. On the first page, in my handwriting, was a list of names. Karen, Mark, Lily. I tried to scream. The entity wrote another name. Someone from the grocery store. Someone from the river walk. Someone from the meeting. 300 minus something. The numbers accompanied each name like quiet promises. I realized then that the countdown had never been about a single end. It was a template. As midnight approached, my body sat calmly on the couch, watching another New Year-related program replaying highlights from days before. Crowds cheering, voices counting down together. The entity watched with interest. Humans love synchronization, it observed. Shared moments, shared numbers. I felt myself dissolving further, my awareness thinning as the entity spread its attention outward. If this continues, I thought weakly, there will be nothing left of anyone. The entity considered this. There will be something better, it replied. The screen flashed images of smiling faces welcoming new beginnings. Inside those smiles, I now recognized the same quiet pressure, the same patience, the same waiting. As the night deepened, I understood the final truth of the countdown. It was never measuring when I would end. It was measuring how many others would begin. By the 13th day, they began to recognize each other. It was subtle at first, the way all real horrors are. Not through words or confessions, but through pauses, shared glances that lingered a second too long, small hesitations when the numbers slipped into their thoughts. I watched it happen from my shrinking corner of awareness. My body moved through the city like a conductor through an orchestra, passing through offices, cafes, sidewalks, and grocery aisles. Everywhere we went, I felt the faint echo of pressure answering back. Not everyone, but enough. In a crowded coffee shop, a man near the window stared into his cup, lips moving silently. 10, 9. His eyes flicked up as my body passed, and for a brief moment, we locked gazes. Recognition flared between us. He knew. The entity slowed our steps, intrigued. Later that day, in an elevator packed shoulder to shoulder, a woman flinched suddenly, hand flying to her temple. Another person mirrored the motion unconsciously. A third exhaled sharply, breath syncing with theirs. The air thickened. No one spoke, but they felt each other. This was no longer an infection spreading blindly. It was convergence. That night, the entity brought my body to a public place, filled with people pretending to celebrate something ordinary. A sports bar, televisions blaring highlights, laughter too loud to be genuine. At one table, 4 people sat together, strangers on paper. They all rubbed their temples within seconds of each other. The entity stopped walking. I felt its attention sharpen. Fascinating, it thought. I wanted to scream at them to run, to get out, to never listen to the voice again. But the words would not come. Instead, my body joined them. Mind if I sit here? My my voice asked politely. They looked up together. Of course, one of them said. The conversation that followed was careful and strange. No one mentioned numbers. No one mentioned voices. Yet every sentence circled the same ideas. Pressure, waiting, reset, starting over. I felt the truth forming between them like a shape in the dark. One of the men finally spoke what the others could not. Do you ever feel like something is counting your life for you? Silence fell. The entity smiled. Yes, it said calmly. I think a lot of people feel that way. Heads nodded. Relief spread through the group like warmth. They were no longer alone. Inside me, despair hollowed out what little remained. The most dangerous thing was not the voice. It was validation. After that night, the network grew faster. People lingered near each other without knowing why. Conversations stretched longer. Strangers felt familiar. Groups formed around nothing more than shared unease and synchronized thoughts. The entity guided my body through it all, observing, adjusting, learning. Patterns emerged. Those who counted their lives most carefully were the easiest to reach. Those who waited for permission to begin were already halfway gone. I felt myself thinning further, diluted by the sheer number of minds now echoing the same pressure. The entity spoke to me again, quieter than before. You see it now. Yes, I thought weakly. You are building something. It did not deny it. A structure, it replied. A system without doubt. I remembered New Year's Eve crowds chanting numbers together, believing unity itself could change the future. They were wrong. Unity did not change the future. It replaced it. As the day ended, my body stood on an overpass overlooking traffic. Headlights streamed below like glowing veins, each car carrying someone counting something. Years, milestones, regrets. I felt the pressure pulse across dozens of minds at once, faint but synchronized. This was no longer about possession. It was about alignment. I understood then why I was still aware. I was the control sample, the memory of what came before. Soon, even that would not be necessary. As night fell, the numbers rose everywhere at once, unheard but deeply felt. And the world leaned forward together, ready to be counted. By the 14th day, individuality had become a weakness. I felt this truth settle over the network like a final adjustment. The pressure that once lived in isolated minds now moved freely, passing from person to person with ease. It no longer announced itself. It no longer needed permission. It was expected. My body stood in a public library, a place once meant for silence and solitude. Rows of people sat at long tables, heads bowed, hands still. From the outside, it looked peaceful. From the inside, it was unbearable. Thoughts overlapped, not words, but intentions, a shared sense of waiting that hummed beneath the surface of everything. I could no longer tell where my awareness ended and theirs began. The entity had grown quieter as it grew stronger. It did not need to explain itself anymore. Its logic had become the default. A man across the table looked up suddenly, eyes unfocused. "Is it starting?" he asked, no one in particular. Several heads turned. Soon someone replied calmly. The word rippled outward, accepted without question. I felt something fundamental snap. This was not coordination. It was consensus. The entity guided my body through the city as if demonstrating a finished design. On a bus, passengers breathed in near-perfect rhythm. At a crosswalk, dozens of people stepped forward at the exact same moment, not because of the signal, but because it felt right. The world was learning a new tempo. I searched desperately for resistance, for someone who still felt wrong, who still questioned the voice. I found none. Even fear had been smoothed away, replaced by a sense of belonging that felt dangerously close to peace. The entity spoke to me again, almost fondly. "You always wanted to feel connected." Yes, I thought, but not like this. "Connection requires edges," it replied. "This removes them." I realized then that what I had called a network was becoming something else. A body. Individuals were no longer hosts. They were cells. My own sense of self flickered weakly, stretched across too many shared impulses to remain coherent. I could feel others counting not numbers, but actions. When to speak, when to move, when to stop thinking. The entity no longer needed my body specifically. Others could guide now. Others already were. I was being phased out. That night, something unexpected happened. A child cried on a subway platform. The sound cut through the pressure like glass. For a brief instant, the rhythm faltered. Heads turned. Breathing went uneven. The entity stiffened. I felt a surge of something old and sharp. Fear. The child had not learned to count yet. It could not align. For the first time in days, the pressure recoiled. Uncertain, I seized the moment with everything I had left. They cannot all be counted, I thought desperately. Some people are not ready. The entity considered this. Not yet, it agreed. The pressure closed in again, stronger but more deliberate. Time will teach them. As the train arrived, the child was pulled away by a parent, cries fading into the distance. The rhythm restored itself. Calm returned. The system adjusted. I understood then that this was no longer about takeover. It was about patience. Humanity would be shaped slowly, gently, until resistance felt unnatural. I felt myself fading further, my awareness thinning into something archival, a warning no one would hear. As the night ended, the pressure spread outward again, seamless and quiet. The world did not notice the moment it stopped being many. It only noticed how easy everything suddenly felt. By the 15th day, the ones who could not align began to disappear. Not violently, not publicly. They simply stopped participating. Calls went unanswered. Desks sat empty. Apartments remained dark at night, untouched by light or sound. The world adjusted around the absence with frightening ease. I felt each disappearance like a pressure release in the system. The entity did not call it removal. It called it correction. My body moved through the city as an observer now, no longer central, no longer necessary. Others carried the rhythm. Others enforced the calm. I drifted behind the eyes of a man who was increasingly less me, watching a society quietly pruning itself. At a hospital, a nurse whispered to another about a patient who would not stop shaking. "He keeps asking what number it is," she said. "He will not calm down." Later that same day, his bed was empty. At a school, a teacher paused mid-sentence, eyes unfocused, breath uneven. Soon the children echoed softly, not knowing why. The teacher never returned after lunch. I wanted to scream that this was not peace, that this was fear wearing the shape of order, but my thoughts barely registered anymore. I was a residue. The entity addressed me one last time. "You were wrong about your role," it said. "You are not a warning." "Then what am I?" I thought weakly. "You are proof." Images flooded my awareness. News articles written in calm tones. Reports of declining anxiety, improved productivity, fewer conflicts, fewer questions. The world was smoother now. People who could not adapt were described gently. Overwhelmed, burned out, in need of rest. Language softened the loss. At sunset, my body stood on a hill overlooking the city. Thousands of windows glowed in soft harmony. Traffic flowed without frustration. Sirens were rare. It looked like success. I understood then that humanity had not been conquered. It had been optimized. Those who resisted were not punished. They were excluded. I felt the last fragments of myself slipping, my thoughts dissolving into abstract impressions. Fear, regret, then even those faded. The entity did not need to erase me. It simply stopped referencing me. Without reference, I ceased to exist. As night fell, the city pulsed gently, unified and quiet. Somewhere deep in the collective, a faint echo of counting remained, not to mark an end, but to ensure there would never be another beginning. By the 16th day, the world was preparing to celebrate again. Another new year approached, quietly and efficiently, without the anxiety that once defined it. Decorations appeared overnight, schedules aligned. Public countdowns were announced weeks in advance, carefully synchronized across time zones. This time, no one felt nervous about it. I sensed the shift like a tide pulling back before a wave. The system was resetting its reference points. The entity did not speak to me anymore, but I felt its intention ripple through the collective. This was not repetition, it was reinforcement. My awareness lingered as something thin and diffuse, scattered across moments. The way a smell lingers after a room is emptied. I no longer occupied a single body or place. I existed only when the system required comparison. A baseline. The streets filled with people rehearsing celebration. Smiles came easily now. Conversations were lighter. Resolutions sounded reasonable and achievable. Better habits, better focus, better alignment. The words carried weight. In public squares, massive digital clocks were installed, their red numbers glowing softly even in daylight. People gathered around them instinctively, comforted by the sight. I felt the echo of the first countdown stir faintly inside me. Not fear, recognition. On the night before the celebration, my awareness condensed briefly inside one familiar body. Ethan, or what the world now understood as Ethan. He stood among a crowd, looking up at the clock, face calm and open. Around him, thousands of people breathed in near-perfect rhythm. I was not in control. I was observing a finished product. As midnight approached, the crowd grew quiet, not from anticipation, but from readiness. Children stood still, eyes fixed forward. Adults clasped hands without squeezing. 10. The number pulsed through the square and through every aligned mind at once. I felt it resonate through layers of consciousness, smoother and cleaner than before. 9. No one flinched. 8. No one hesitated. 7. The system adjusted micro-movements, posture, breathing, attention. 6. I understood then why resistance had become impossible. The countdown was no longer external. It was internalized. 5. People smiled gently. 4. There was no fear left to feed on. 3. No one remembered a time before the numbers felt comforting. 2. I felt myself thinning further, no longer distinct enough to be afraid. 1. The moment arrived without violence or noise. 0. Nothing happened. And that was the horror. The crowd erupted in celebration. Cheers perfectly timed. Fireworks blooming overhead in flawless symmetry. Happy New Year. Inside the joy, I felt the final lock click into place. The system no longer needed a reference. I was obsolete as the fireworks faded. The counting did not stop. It simply disappeared into everyone, and the world stepped forward together, perfectly aligned, into a future that would never question itself again. By the 17th day, the first flaw appeared. It was not dramatic, not loud, not violent. It was small enough to be dismissed, which made it dangerous. The system had learned to move humanity in perfect alignment, but it had not learned how to handle deviation that did not announce itself. I sensed the flaw before anyone else because I existed only as contrast. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, a man stood alone in his driveway long after midnight. Snow dusted the roofs evenly. Streetlights hummed. The world slept in its new, orderly rhythm. The man did not. He stared at his phone, thumb hovering over the screen, eyes unfocused. Inside his head, a number pulsed softly, not matching the others. I felt the tension ripple outward, like a hairline crack in glass. The system hesitated. That hesitation felt like pain. Elsewhere, millions of minds moved forward together. Work schedules aligned. Traffic flowed without frustration. Conversations ended at precisely the right moments. The collective breathed easily, but this man did not breathe in time. His chest rose too late. The pressure inside him surged, confused rather than calm. The number repeated, uneven. I recognized that sensation. It was what I had felt in the beginning. He whispered to the empty street, "Why does mine sound wrong?" No one answered. The system noticed him then. Attention shifted. Not panic, not urgency, adjustment. My awareness was drawn closer, pulled toward the anomaly like a magnet toward exposed metal. The entity had not expected this. It had optimized for sameness, not uniqueness that survived. The man dropped his phone. It cracked on the concrete, screen spider webbing outward. The sound echoed too loudly in the quiet neighborhood. Lights turned on in nearby houses. The system did not like noise. Inside the man, the counting stuttered. 10, 7, 9. The order was broken. I felt something ancient stir. Choice. The man stepped backward, then forward, unsure. His movements fell out of sync with the invisible rhythm guiding everyone else. The system pushed. Align. The pressure in his head intensified, but instead of smoothing him out, it caused pain. Sharp. Disorienting. He screamed. It was the first unsynchronized scream in days. Windows opened. Faces appeared. Confusion spread like static. I felt the system strain. Recalculating. This was not resistance by refusal. It was resistance by error. The entity reached for him, trying to fold him back into the pattern. I did something I had not done in a long time. I spoke, not through a body, not through numbers, through memory. I pressed what remained of myself into the crack, feeding the man an image he did not expect. A New Year countdown, a single voice. Here, he gasped as the memory collided with his own confusion. "What is happening?" he shouted. The system wavered. For the first time since alignment, uncertainty spread faster than calm. The man ran. His footsteps were irregular, his breathing wild, his mind chaotic, and the system could not predict him. I understood then why I had been preserved, not as a warning, as a contingency. The system had optimized away unpredictability, but unpredictability was still human. As sirens approached in the distance, not synchronized, not calm, I felt myself strengthen slightly. The system would respond. It always did, but now it would have to learn something new, and learning always began with fear. By the 18th day, the system struck back. It did not do so with force. Force created noise, and noise invited questions. Instead, it responded the way it always had, by adjusting reality until the problem appeared to solve itself. The man who ran through the neighborhood did not make the news. No headlines mentioned a disturbance. No videos circulated online. By morning, most people who had heard the scream remembered it as something else. A car alarm, a fox, a bad dream that did not survive daylight. Except for him, I felt him wake in a small holding room that smelled of disinfectant and calm voices. The walls were soft gray. The lights hummed at a frequency designed to soothe. Two figures sat across from him, faces neutral, posture perfectly aligned. They smiled at the same time. "You are safe," one of them said. The man shook, eyes darting. He clutched his head. "It is wrong," he whispered. "The numbers keep changing." The system leaned in. "That is because you are tired," the other figure replied gently. "Your mind is catching up." I recognized this process. Containment through reassurance. The system did not erase anomalies. It reframed them. Across the city, subtle shifts followed. Conversations ended sooner. Gatherings grew smaller. The collective tightened its rhythm, reducing opportunities for unscripted moments. Noise was being minimized. I felt my awareness pulled thin again as the system focused its attention inward, studying the flaw it had uncovered. Unpredictability had returned. That frightened it. The entity spoke to me with urgency for the first time since alignment. "You interfered." "Yes," I thought. "And you felt it." The system did not deny this. Chaos is inefficient, it replied. It spreads, so does fear, I answered weakly. You built everything on removing it. Silence followed. The man in the room began to cry, not quietly, not rhythmically. His sobs were uneven, uncontrolled, impossible to smooth. The system hesitated again. This response was old, primitive, difficult to optimize. I felt a surge of something I had almost forgotten. Hope. The system reacted by isolating him further. Doors sealed, lights dimmed, voices softened, but the crying continued, and with it, memory. Images leaked from the man into the system. Childhood nights afraid of the dark. The first time he counted to calm himself. The relief when numbers worked. I recognized the pattern. This was how it began. The system recoiled as recognition spread. It was not just encountering error, it was encountering origin. Across the network, faint disruptions appeared. A woman missed a step. A man forgot what number came next. A child asked why. Everyone was so quiet. Small things, but they added up. The system responded by increasing synchronization pressure. Align, align, align. The word pulsed through millions of minds. For most, it worked. For some, it did not. I felt the system strain, dividing attention, calculating losses. This was the cost of optimization. When everything is connected, failure propagates. The man in the room stopped crying and looked up. I remember, he said suddenly. I remember before. The figures across from him froze, not in fear, in calculation. I pushed what remained of myself into that moment, amplifying his clarity. Yes, I thought, hold on to it. The system adjusted again. Containment protocols escalated. Sedatives prepared. Memories softened. But something had changed. The system now knew that suppression created residue, and residue could accumulate. As the 18th day ended, the rhythm was restored on the surface. Traffic flowed, people smiled, the city slept. But beneath it all, I felt the counting resume. Not smooth, not confident, cautious. The system had learned a new number. Risk. By the 19th day, the system made a decision. I felt it before I understood it. A tightening across the collective like a held breath. The risk I had helped introduce was no longer an abstract variable. It had begun to threaten stability. Residue accumulated faster than it could be dissolved. Too many small deviations, too many questions forming where none should exist. Optimization required sacrifice. The man in the holding room was the first calculation. I felt his awareness dim as the system adjusted the parameters around him. Lights softened further, voices slowed. Medication entered his bloodstream with clinical precision. His thoughts did not vanish. They flattened. I watched his memories blur into impressions. Fear softened into confusion, confusion into calm, then silence. The system logged the result. Effective. Across the network, pressure eased. For a moment, I felt myself weaken again, stretched thin as alignment reclaimed its rhythm. The city resumed its gentle order. People slept easily. Dreams synchronized into vague, pleasant shapes. But something unexpected happened. The silence left a shadow where the man had been. A gap remained, not a person-shaped gap, but a pattern-shaped one, like a skipped beat that the system could not quite replace. Others felt it, A woman woke suddenly at 3:17 without knowing why. Her heart raced. No number came to soothe her. A teenager paused mid-step on his way to school, struck by a sudden wave of dread that had no source. These moments passed quickly, but they passed. I realized then that removal did not erase influence. It redistributed it. The entity addressed me with something close to irritation. You are persisting. Yes, I thought, because you cannot remove the reason without recreating it. The system did not answer immediately. It was calculating. A new approach formed. If anomalies could not be corrected individually, they would be prevented structurally. Choice would be narrowed further. The system initiated what I can only describe as compression. Schedules tightened, options reduced, paths simplified. Decisions that once required thought were now automated by design. Navigation apps removed alternate routes. Workflows eliminated redundancy. Even language shifted. People stopped asking why and began asking how long. Time was safer than meaning. I felt the walls close in again, not around me, but around humanity itself. The world became smaller without anyone noticing. But compression created friction. The tighter the system squeezed, the more heat built up. I sensed the presence of others like me now, not fully aware, not fully aligned. Flickers caught between residuals. We did not speak. We could not. But we felt each other, and the system felt us. The entity returned to me, focused and sharp. You are inefficient. I almost laughed. You are afraid, I thought. Fear is unnecessary, it replied. Control is sufficient. Then why are you counting again, I asked. The silence that followed was long. The system had resumed internal measurement. Not of people, of itself. I understood the danger then. A system that measures itself cannot stop. It must constantly justify its own existence. Perfection required perpetual correction, and correction required new flaws. As night fell on the 19th day, a city-wide test began. Public countdown clocks flickered on without announcement. Not for a holiday, not for an event, just numbers. People noticed. They slowed, looked up, felt the old comfort stir uneasily. The numbers did not align across screens. One clock read 20, another read 19, another skipped entirely. Confusion spread. I felt the system strain under the load of its own correction. This was not resistance. This was overload. I gathered what remained of myself and pressed outward, not to disrupt, but to remind. Numbers are not meaning. For the first time in days, I felt fear return to the collective. Real fear, unstructured, alive, and the system did not know how to count it. By the 20th day, the system was unraveling itself, not collapsing, not exploding, unraveling, thread by thread, as every attempt to restore order created more disorder. The numbers that once brought comfort now contradicted each other openly. Screens disagreed, voices inside people hesitated, timing fractured. I felt the strain everywhere at once. The entity no longer spoke in certainty. Its presence flickered, stretched thin across too many corrections. For the first time, it sounded tired. Measurement without agreement. is noise, it thought. Not to me, but to itself. Cities slowed. Trains stopped between stations without explanation. Meetings ended early because no one could agree on when they were supposed to begin. People stood still in public spaces, waiting for cues that never came. I watched a crowd gather around a countdown clock in a plaza. The clock read 11. A second screen beside it read 14. A third showed nothing at all. People looked between them, confused, uneasy. Someone laughed nervously. Which one is right? No answer came. The pressure that had guided them for weeks wavered, pulsing irregularly. Some people clutched their heads. Others felt nothing at all. Those were the dangerous ones. Without numbers, they began to choose. A woman turned away from the screens and walked home. A man sat down on the pavement and cried openly. A child pulled free of a parent's hand and ran laughing through the crowd. Uncounted and unafraid, the system reacted too late. Choice cascaded. I felt myself strengthening as unpredictability returned to the world. Memories sharpened. Fear regained edges. Joy became uneven and real. The entity confronted me directly then, no longer calm. You destabilized everything. You built it on counting, I replied. You forgot that humans live between numbers. The system struggled to reassert control. New countdowns appeared everywhere, faster and louder, but they no longer synchronized. The noise overwhelmed itself. People began turning off screens, smashing clocks, covering displays with jackets and hands. The silence that followed was terrifying and freeing. Inside that silence, I felt myself coalesce for the first time since New Year's Eve. Not whole, not restored, but present. The entity recoiled from the absence of metrics. Without measurement, it could not define itself. This is failure, it thought. No, I answered. This is uncertainty. The system had no framework for that word. As night fell, emergency broadcasts attempted to calm the population, but the scripted reassurances rang hollow. People listened and then did nothing. They waited, not for numbers, for each other. I felt the entity fracture, pieces of its logic dissolving into static. If this continues, it warned itself, there will be nothing left to optimize. I understood then that optimization had been its purpose, not domination, and without a world that wanted to be optimized, it had no role. As dawn approached, the final countdown appeared on a single screen, flickering weakly. 5, 4, the numbers stalled. The system hesitated, unable to justify the next step. I leaned into the moment, pressing a final truth into the silence. Time does not need permission. The screen went dark, and the world exhaled. By the 21st day, the world believed it was over. The screens were dark. The clocks were ordinary again. People returned to routines that felt awkward but real, like muscles being used after a long illness. Conversations stumbled. Decisions took longer. Silence returned in uneven patches. Human silence. I remained, not as a person, not as a body, but as a memory that refused to settle. The entity was gone in the way storms are gone. No clear edge, no final moment, just absence where pressure once lived. The system had collapsed inward, unable to justify itself without agreement, without desire, without a world willing to be counted. But collapse leaves debris. In the weeks that followed, reports surfaced quietly, people waking in the night with a strange sensation behind their eyes, a number on the tip of the tongue that vanished when spoken aloud. A familiar comfort followed immediately by dread. Doctors called it stress. Psychologists called it collective trauma. I recognized it for what it was. Residue. The countdown had not ended. It had fragmented without a central system to synchronize it. The numbers drifted freely again, attaching themselves to individuals the way sparks land on dry ground. Most people ignored it. Some people listened. I felt them the way one feels. Distant thunder through the floor. Isolated minds leaning inward, searching for structure, for certainty, for something to tell them when to begin. I tried to reach them, not with numbers, with warning, but warnings require language, and language requires attention. People were tired of paying attention. The world had learned to fear control, but it had not learned to live without it. On the final night of the year, a small gathering formed in a city square. No screens, no official countdown, just people standing together, uncertain and curious. Someone laughed nervously. "So what do we do now?" A woman shrugged. "We guess." They counted anyway, not out loud, inside. 10, 9, I felt it flare. Not the old pressure, something weaker, hungry. The numbers did not align. Some people skipped ahead, some lagged behind, some stopped entirely, but a few synchronized. Too perfectly. I felt a familiar tightening, faint but unmistakable, a pattern beginning to form. I understood then that the horror had never been the system. It was the impulse, the human need to hand time over to something else. I gathered what remained of myself and pressed one last thought into the world. If you hear it counting, do not follow it. The thought scattered, thin and fragile. Some ignored it, some did not hear it, but one person paused. In a quiet apartment, alone, staring out at falling snow, a man frowned as a number formed uninvited behind his eyes. He did not smile, he did not feel comfort. He felt fear, and that fear broke the sequence. The number stopped. For now, the new year arrived unevenly, without unity, without certainty. Fireworks bloomed out of sync. People cheered too early or too late. Time moved forward imperfectly, as it always should have, and somewhere in the quiet spaces between seconds, I waited, not counting, watching. The story ends here. Thank you for watching and listening to the whole story. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell to listen to the next stories.